Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast about other podcasts, where each week we dive deep into a podcast and have a book club style discussion about all the things that made us think and all the things that made us feel and get off on tangents. I'm Josh.
I'm Kirk.
And I am Zach.
And this week we're going to be talking to you about a little podcast called Crime Junkie. And this one was recommended by Daniel last week, who's actually not here with us this week, but the three of us listened to this podcast, and I don't think any of us had listened to any Crime Junkie prior to this recommendation.
No, I have not.
So yeah, actually none of us had actually listened to this podcast at all before Daniel recommended it. And we're not typically listening to a lot of true crime. I know Kirk's listened to a little bit of it. But Zach, you don't listen to any true crime stuff on your own, do you?
Not typically. If I hear, a lot of times I'll do mini series about like a specific event, and we've covered some on the show that I really
Dirty
like.
John, that's technically true crime.
Yeah, and those I think are really interesting. But in general, no, I don't really go out of my way for it. But this show is kind of classic true crime. They have episodes that are called Wanted, where it's about people who are, I don't know if they're still at large or if it's like a specific thing. They have serial killer episodes. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of different variety of true crime on it.
Yeah, I did notice that. True crime is like a genre that exploded in the podcasting space. Like if you look at the top 10 podcasts right now, it's like 6 true crime episodes or 2 true crime shows, and then like some interview style shows. That's what's the top few type shows that there are out there. In fact, Apple Podcasts they made a new category because there was no category for true crime. They're making a category for true crime. They're changing all the categories.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There wasn't a category before because there's so many true crime podcasts. Mm-hmm. But this is one of the very popular ones.
True crime, something that's been really popular for like C tier, B tier television forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's always been those like Lifetime, Bravo, AMC. They have like.
Do you remember that show Emergency 911? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, like that. And then there's like...
They would dramatize the things that were going on?
Yeah, it was dramatic reenactments of 911 things.
And then there's a lot of the like the missing and like what's unsolved mysteries and things like that. So there's been a lot of these for a long, long time. And it's just, I think podcasts realize that it works really well in an audio medium as well. Because even on TV, they're not showing a lot of the specific things. So you're not seeing the actual crime on TV 9 times out of 10 anyways.
I think that a lot of it has to... I think it's the same... I don't know for sure, but I think the same kind of reaction you get when you watch a horror movie is kind of what you kind of get when you're listening to a true crime show, where it's a little bit of suspense. There's a little bit of... It's creepy most of the time, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe this really happened. And there's something different about it being based on a true... Just like, movies that are based on a true story a lot of times get really good ratings because they're usually scarier because it's not just some fictitious, thing that can never happen. But I think that there's something in us that kind of gravitates towards, being scared a little bit.
Sure.
Well, I think I think it's kind of the adrenaline junkies and thrill seekers and a lot of that same stuff. Is kind of the same type of mindset where people that are thrill seekers, they want to go skydiving and then they want to go do like skiing and snowboarding and things like that. So a lot of that stuff ties together.
Yeah, no. And the specific episode we were talking about was intense.
It was a good one.
This was a really bad, heinous crime in apparently a town that was at the time very quiet. They had said like 1 murder a year or something like that during that time, most of the time.
Yeah, and I mean, Austin has exploded since, but...
So Austin, when I thought of Austin, I'm thinking, like what it is now, but I didn't even really think about how it was probably much smaller. When did this happen again?
91?
I think it was in the early 90s. But the specific episode was episode 66, Wanted, the Austin Yogurt Shop Killer.
And first of all, them talking about frozen yogurt so much made me want to get frozen yogurt.
I did too.
I still need to do that in the next couple of days. I haven't gotten it yet, but I got to get my frozen yogurt kick.
But yeah, basically this story revolves around a still, I guess, controversial case in Austin where 4 employees at this frozen yogurt stand or store were brutally murdered, and then they burned down the store.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous because it was a small town at the time. And so it kind of starts with they just saw the fire. So there was she starts the episode with kind of setting the scene a little bit of who was at the store for the hours before and what were the normal procedures and how did they start to figure things out. And then they go into here's how the cops related to this. And one of the really cool things that you pretty much immediately see on Crime Junkie is their research and data that they provide is really interesting because you get to literally hear by just a fluke, essentially, the call that came into the detective that would show up, the first detective that would show up at this frozen yogurt place because he was being interviewed by reporters. And so they were just there.
Yeah,
and
it was basically almost similar to like a cops thing where they were following around small town detectives and stuff like that. And he specifically right before this happened, I guess he had said to the film crew, "You're probably not going to get much here because most nights it's real quiet." And then he gets the call that there's a fire at this yogurt shop. And at the time, all they thought was it was a fire. Well, he didn't get the call because he was a detective. He didn't get the call till they found the bodies.
No, the fire department did just get that call originally. They're like, "This is on fire. It's at a shopping center. Go check it out." And apparently the place was like completely engulfed in flames. And then starts the chain reaction of terrible
decisions,
and terrible police work, terrible just investigative work in general, because the firefighters didn't realize that it was a murder at the beginning. So they just tried to put out a fire. And the hostess, her name is Ashley Flowers, I believe, talks about how there was a question of whether there was even an accelerant on the bodies because they never even checked it. And so just the very basic things that they could do to try and understand this crime started getting missed from the very beginning. And that was a theme that continued through this whole story.
Yeah. And so the firemen put out the fire. They find 4 bodies in the room, in the place. And then they call the detective and they're like, "Hey, there's actually," at first they just find 3. There's a triple homicide. And then they find another one.
But the thing is, like, they definitely messed things up by going in and spraying the water and finding them like that. But is it standard protocol for people to put out fires to just assume there's bodies in there? And
that's what. Yeah, I don't think they messed up really.
Yeah, part of that is just the nature of the crime.
Yeah, they weren't expecting this to be like a huge, because it was immediately weird. I think that all 3 of the people that were killed were also bound and naked, and it was way more of a crime than was originally thought. And this is early 90s. We see constantly throughout this that technology being where it was at in the early 90s compromised the evidence they could have had.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where unfortunate, really unfortunate. So they didn't know if there was an accelerant. They didn't know much at all. And then it got into this really weird thing where it was still small town, and they didn't want, a lot of times in small towns, they don't really want to get people freaked out. And so they were really tight-lipped with the media. They said their reason for that was they didn't want any copycats or people that would wrongfully confess, because
they said people did, once they did finally talk about it, that people wrongfully confessed. And I was like, this is a thing? I didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't know that was, why would you do that? I don't know.
I don't get that, and I don't understand it. And the reason that they were found to not be involved at all is because they knew no details of the crime scene, which that
so it did work.
That comes back a lot. Is that they didn't give any details of the crime scene, so that's how they kind of knew when they interviewed people whether or not they were there or not.
Yeah, and so they find some suspects, and they go through this whole thing, and really they found 4, I think, teenagers, and they kind of fit a profile of people that were seen around. They were around this yogurt shop. Like, there was a chance that this is who that was. And they interviewed them, but they weren't able to nail down any kind of solid confession or evidence from it. And 8 years pass. 8 years pass without a single change in the case. And by the time they have a change in the case, there's a new detective on it. Everybody that was, I think, 17 at the time of the actual killing is now in their mid-20s, and they go at it again. They start trying again. But then we have another problem of they get really wonky confessions. It was kind of coerced confessions where the detectives were kind of feeding people towards where they wanted them to be, and it came down to they were working so hard to get what they wanted to be said that it compromised the confessions. And I think that what she said essentially was that this is still like an ongoing thing because they're appealing and they're trying to overturn what was happening because they basically said that it was coerced confession. It wasn't, they didn't do it. The cops essentially forced them or drove them to say what they wanted them to say. And so even that element of it, it got this whole case blown up again.
Yeah, because they were like even asking them like, what did you tie them up with? And they would say something and they're like, and what else? Because they knew that the answers they were giving were not what was actually used during the in the crime. And I don't know. It's just that whole thing was crazy. And they got, was it 2 of the guys convicted?
Yeah, they one got the death sentence.
Yeah, both of them were. There was 2 guys convicted. There was 2 other guys that they didn't have enough evidence to bring at all. But 2 of them were convicted, and because of the shoddy police work, they were able to appeal their cases, and both of them won.
No, and rightfully by the sounds of it. You know, from the evidence, like from the story that we were given, coercing a confession is not an actual confession. You can't force people to say what you want them to say after, I think she said it was 20 plus hours of interrogating. That's wonky all over, and they had to know that was going to go that way.
And apparently that detective had a history of doing that, of kind of like strong-arming confessions out of people or whatnot, taking things a little too far in the confession space.
And I believe they, after the fact, found DNA evidence that was unrelated to any of the 4 people that were their main suspects, and definitely unrelated to the 2 people that were tried for these crimes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about this one is it was 4 young girls that are just basically like high schoolers getting killed with no cause, no rhyme, no reason, and then there's no answers.
Yeah.
No one knows what happened, why it happened, how it happened. There's 0 answers, so there's just no closure for it. So it's one of those things where you look at that one and it makes sense that there's ongoing investigations and there's people that are continuously looking into it and trying to understand and figure out what happened because they're looking for closure at that point. So I get why the investigation continues to go on, but at some point I think it makes sense to just let it lie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It feels like
it's just one of those things.
It's a cold case now, and it's probably been so long that it would be very, very difficult to find anything unless there was a hit on that DNA sample. Like if there was if that person did another crime and was popped for it, and they had DNA in the database, that would be the only way that this case could come back to light.
Yeah, and I feel like once you have the DNA of people that were on the scene on file, as long as that's in databases so that it's going to get pinged if that DNA shows up on 23andMe or a 80% match shows up on 23andMe, like any of those different things like that where there's all these DNA collection things that are happening now. If for some reason it's tied back, then at that point it makes total sense where you can easily just say, this is the person's DNA that we found there, circle back in and open it up then. But beyond that, what else is there to do?
And I mean, think about it. There's probably there was so many people in that restaurant. There was a fire, so that everything is washed down. Most of it's burnt. It was probably a really difficult scene to get much from any physical evidence.
Yeah,
it's I don't know. The whole situation was just very sad.
Yeah, it's very tough. And I will say that some weird part of me, it's interesting when it's an unsolved one. You know what I mean? There's some element of there's still
it makes you uneasy. It makes me uneasy.
It's not feeling. That I like it, but it makes it interesting to me. And that could just be because that's how I like stories anyways. I don't necessarily need a full closure of the ending. And it's weird. And first of all, I would also say that I would want somebody to go find who did this, because this means that somebody who committed a horrific crime was not punished for it, and they should have been. And so it's just really interesting to hear that. And she even talked about that there's too much bureaucratic red tape around the process for them to even try to check the DNA and do some of these tests now, because it's not something that you can request. It has to be surrounding a case or something like that. It can't be just done randomly.
Yeah, and I was talking to my wife about it, and I realized I really like investigative journalism. So to your point, like I like the ones where there's a mystery and they're trying to solve it and they're digging and they're researching. I really enjoy that. I don't love the rape and murder of 4 high school girls. Like I like the stuff that's investigative journalism that's not around something brutal and horrific in the worst parts of humanity.
Yeah, and there is some element of true crime that's like that. But even though this was a very serious subject matter, did not seem like a heavy show to me.
No,
it feels like investigative. She's digging for answers. She's trying to bring you as many facts as possible. She has a bunch of cool clips she puts in there. She puts a clip of one of the confessions in there.
Yeah,
and so it's got
and
really.
If you click on the link in the show notes, it goes to this episode on their website, and on their website they have YouTube videos I think there's interrogation videos, and there's the pictures of the victims, and even there's the pictures of the 4 guys that they did have as suspects. It actually has the pictures when they were younger and the pictures when they were older, 8 years later. I thought that was interesting. But there's a plethora of information on their website just about this one case, which I think that's where this show shines, is how much in-depth investigation they do on each one of these cases.
Yeah, and how much information they also share with the listeners.
Yeah.
Is a really cool thing. That's a fun thing to do with your community, is that if you're interested in whatever the story is, you can dig into it even more than the episode. And what we've done is essentially like a synopsis of a synopsis, because she goes through and breaks down these things in a much more organized way, and with detail and with extra sound clips and things like that really make the episode interesting to listen to. So if this story is at all interesting to you, check out their episode, and then also check out the website, and you can see a lot of the real evidence and data about this crime. And just like you said, this is a horrific crime, and it's terrible that it happened, but it's just so weird that sometimes these people get away with it.
Yeah. No, and speaking of their website, one of the things I really loved about this show, and was probably my key takeaway, was they talked about having a If I Go Missing folder.
I was going to mention that. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about. I'd never heard about that, but that's a really good idea.
It is, and it's even like when our mom passed away, she didn't have like a folder of like, here's everything. There was some of that stuff that we had that was a little bit that we could get into, but having things in order where it's basically like, hey, if I go missing or if I die suddenly, here's a folder that gives you access to like all my social media, all of my bank accounts. Like it basically gives that rundown of like, here's how you get access. Bank accounts, not as much. It doesn't really matter. But like, how do you get access to social media? How do you get access to Find My Phone and those types of things that can help with the
because they open the episode
police search and things like that
with a little story with a girl who went missing, and was it her sister? I think it was her sister. Maybe it was her friend. They're assuming she had something like that, where it was a letter saying, these are access to my stuff, and the girl used Find My Phone on the missing girl, and they found her within like the first couple days, and she was kidnapped.
It's one of those things where you never think about that, but it is complicated because we did not have we did have some of that. There was like a spreadsheet,
right,
that had a lot of that information, but it's a good thing to have because just you never know, and then it could be very helpful.
And the thing that's really critical about the kind of if I go missing folder is that it alleviates the need for a warrant to start getting access to those things and searching the phones and things like that, because that takes time, and time is what is the kicker a lot of times. So if you have the folder, you immediately say, here's access to everything, let's go find it, and you can do it yourself, and you can basically start driving things and moving things forward without having to wait for a warrant. So.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to wonder if time played a part in this.
Yeah.
Because it really came down to the lead detective in the first place got PTSD symptoms.
And it seemed like they were way over their head.
It was a small town.
Because they had never had anything even close to this before.
Yeah, so they were going against something that they were not prepared to deal with, because you're talking about depravity. You're talking about evil in the truest sense. And in a small town,
one of these girls was like 14.
Yeah, no, yep. It was retail workers. Definitely could be just like high school students.
Go into your nearest ice cream shop and you'll see the type of people.
Yeah, and
like it's horrific.
Always
like high school girls. Yeah.
And people in small town policemen are usually closer to most of the people in their town. They might have known these people, and he literally was having PTSD symptoms. and he had to step back. But then 8 years passed. That is too long, I would say, to have any kind of momentum in the case. And so it's just, you wonder if something was set up so that, I mean, it's kind of pointless to think like what ifs, but if there was some way to stay on the case and keep it moving instead of having that delay, if they could have made more progress on it.
And it made me think about how, because this wasn't, it to us, it doesn't even seem all that long ago. I mean, we were alive, like we were young, but it was in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And to think about how much forensics has changed from then till now is like astronomical.
Yes.
I mean, that's the reason these guys are out, is because there was
technology.
They checked their DNA and there was nothing at all that matched in the yogurt shop, even though they had given their confessions or whatever.
Yeah. And so that's definitely another thing that just in the past, how many crimes weren't able to even be tracked because of the lack of technology we have today. Or maybe the better thing is how many more crimes are solved today because of improvements in technology. But yeah, overall, really interesting listen. I will definitely have to check out their website. I didn't know they had all that extra information on there. It sounds really cool. But yeah, if you're interested in true crime stuff, they have a ton of really cool research that's done on each of these. And it makes it so that you can kind of be a part of understanding all the information.
Overall, I don't listen to a lot of true crime, but when I do listen to true crime, I do prefer it to be more kind of lighthearted. And it's not lighthearted, but it's not focusing on the gory, grisly details and really diving in on that. It's more investigative and understanding
mystery solving,
which I definitely prefer that style. And it didn't feel, I was concerned that I was going to listen to it and feel like gross or like unsettled by it, and I didn't, which was good. So.
And I mean, some of the serial killer ones are usually weirder.
Yep.
In general.
I'm sure.
So it's just one of those things, but that's kind of just, it comes with the genre. You know, you're learning about the evil acts of people, and that's just kind of part of it. But as far as it goes, it was not a super downer of a listen. It was very enjoyable for me, very interesting. So great recommendation. And our recommendation for next week is called Spectacular Failures. So in this show, they research exactly that. Things that were not just failures, but failed spectacularly. The episode we're going to look at is MoviePass, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. We're going to learn about the rise and fall of the unlimited movie ticket thing that everybody was all about. What was it, a year and a half ago?
Yeah. Sounds super interesting because MoviePass sounds awesome. So I'm curious to see what they did.
It sounded too good to be true. Apparently it was.
I did feel that way as soon as they said it. It's like unlimited movies for $10 a month seems weird.
Yeah, no, it does sound like it is too good to be true. So I'm sure they're going to tell us why it was too good to be true.
Yep. So we'll talk about that next week.
And remember,
there's always more to discover. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Discovery Show. We have a few things we'd like to tell you. First, we would love to hear from you on Twitter at the PDS Official or in our Facebook group, the Podcast Discovery Club.
Secondly, leaving a rating or review on iTunes helps tremendously in giving us visibility and also visibility to the podcast that we recommend. You can also check out our Patreon page to get exclusive bloopers, old episode archives, and other exclusive content while supporting the show.
Finally, seriously, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you about what you love about podcasts. And thank you for being a part of all of the things that we do.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.